Welcome to the Alfa Romeo Museum for this new backstage. Today we are talking about the 75. I'm happy to see a full audience. We are talking about a specific Alfa 75, but in order to do this, I'd like to talk about the 1988-1999 Giro d'Italia, which was born by Alfa Romeo, and when the 75 mastered a race which gets back to a tradition of Alfa Romeo. Its ambition to call it a mille miglia by the times, but they toured half Italy from Rome up to the north of Italy on stretches on the road, on tracks, racetracks, and with cars that had just small differences from the serial cars. But let's hear the words of the person who was the protagonist of the Giro d'Italia, who at the time was head of Alfa Romeo Corse, Giorgio Bianco. So, it's the 10th Giro d'Italia, which is about to start. We have read on Autosprint that maybe the other competitors fear to race with Alfa Romeo. What do you think? Well, I cannot judge the thinking of other brands and dealers. We are here. We are here to protect our win of last year, and we are here because we believe in this kind of events. Alfa Romeo has always won this kind of competitions, and I myself had the honor of getting great results at the Tour de France with Alfa Romeo. So it's our tradition, it's our heritage. We try to continue it and to interpret it in the best possible way. So this was the debut of the Giro d'Italia, but today, as always at our backstages, we want the protagonists to tell you the story in their own words. So today we have important guests. We have Miki Biasion, needs no presentation. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure. I've seen a lot of beautiful cars. Congratulations. Well, thank you for being here. For you, the Giro d'Italia years were two important years. It was a nice way to conclude the season. Yes, a Lancia pilot who races with Alfa Romeo, well, it's a prize. But apart from jokes, these years were years where I was extremely fast, competitive, and for a couple of times in 87 and 86, I was very close to the World Championship, and I had to win at all costs. The seasons were extremely intense. 330 days per year in the car. So apart from pilot, I was a test pilot. So 10 weekends, I spent 10 weekends home during the entire year. But I was in great shape. I was a pilot to beat. It's one of those phases in stages in the life of a pilot when everything works. You have to have the capacity, the skills, the talent, the passion, the willingness to work. Sacrifice is also to leave time from your family. But then, if there is not a small part of luck around you, putting together all these qualities, without that you cannot win. But in those years, I was competitive. I could win. I was not a racetrack pilot, but I also loved the racetrack cars. I didn't. I hadn't driven, sorry, a rear traction car for years. When I was a young kid, I started with those kind of cars, but I almost forgot it because with the 037, I had a rear central engine, and then I was driving four wheel cars, but the car was extremely fast. And hopefully 2-3 days before the race here no, in Balocco, not in race, Giorgio Francia allowed me to do some loops. I had some problems, but because pilots are used to drive, not to be navigators or side pilots, and it teach me how to drive the car. I have this beautiful memory of this super fast car and challenging car, but it was a great satisfaction for me. And then on the racetrack, I always race with Patrese, Larini, two great pilots. So we had to be competitive. So you talked about Giorgio Francia. No one more than you knows these cars. So you won one of the Giro Italia with it, but good afternoon, congratulations coming here today. Well, it takes me back 30, 40 years in my life. So seeing these cars, well, it's something incredible. It's my work, it's my passion. We've seen Giorgio Pianta. We should remind that he was a great person. If we like, he was the man who allowed Alfa Romeo to win several championships. He was a man who, well, for sure, the first thing for him was sportsmanship, and then it came the bureaucratic part, because also a race department should justify what they do. But the first thing was passion. So that's my work. In that period, we were also very active in America, so I had engineers going back and forth from America, and in Italy we continued this development. I would say we have done a great work. The car is extremely fast, but the credit goes to the team. So nowadays it's not my credit, my merit, but the merit of a group of people who at the time worked because it was their passion. And if we made mistakes, there was no one say, "Oh, you did a mistake, it's your fault." No. Okay, there's a problem, we made a mistake, let's try to fix it and win. And that was the credit of Alfa Romeo and the group which was there and allowed us to win. So apart from you two, we have one more guest, a great champion, who is disconnecting, but maybe we have still time to... Okay, we'll get back later, but we know who he is. And then connected, we have Giorgio Camaschella, one of the men who designed this car. Well, one of the most well-known articles was the 75 with the American dress, because it was developed according to the IMSA norms. The dress, the aerodynamic part, was the work of Giorgio Camaschella. Hi, hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to represent the technicians, the bad technicians who built these cars. It was a united and fun team, the team of the Auto Delta of those times. It's an incredible pleasure to see Giorgio Francia again and to see Larini and Biasion. Well, the 75 IMSA was the last stage, the last evolution, in which we had the pleasure to put everything that over the years we developed for the 75 Group A Turbo, Group A Turbo Evolution. So what was not possible to do immediately, because maybe there were problems of type approval, types of costs, or many problems. Well, Giorgio Pianta, who is a pleasure to see in those images, had the courage to start this IMSA adventure, and really gave us a present, because he allowed us to put together everything we developed and to create cars that in the end became winning cars. So they remain in the memory of everyone and are there at the museum, and I think that many people admire them. Well, the IMSA was the last chapter of a history which started in '86, the first Turbo Evolution. Yes, so with the idea of building a series of 500 cars, a car ready for for the sports type approval, which was similar to the 75, but which also had differences. And on a series of documents that we are going to show now, I've seen your name frequently. So the aerodynamic part was fundamental. Yes, yes, I have a few images here that I gathered, but I'm sure you have others to illustrate this technical evolution. Of course, I will remember my part because at the time I was a track engineer from Giorgio Francia, Barilla, and the other pilots. I remember the aerodynamics part. In Balocco, we were using the track while your father took our times. So I will answer with pleasure to all questions. I like to remind the nice things. So on certain things, maybe I will not answer, but we will try to do our best. I don't know if you have specific documents you want to talk about, but I wanted to remind you that the 75 Turbo, well, in those years, 1986, Auto Delta was very keen on preparing the four cylinders Turbo 1500 to give to La Niger in 87 next year. So the program of 75 Turbo and Turbo Evolution was a program developed for the customers. So it was not a full-time thing for us. And the 75 Turbo, Group A, was already in itself a very competitive car. As a matter of fact, Giorgio will probably remember that at the end of 86, we went to Estoril, the last competition of the European Championship, and we were extremely competitive in the second division compared to BMW 320, I don't remember. So it would have been a competitive car already in 86. But then we would have had to develop it in 85 when Alfa Romeo was still in the Formula One. But we had all energies devoted on that and all our passion devoted on that. And then, in the spring of 87, we did some tests at a Pininfarina wind turbine to develop the 75 Turbo Evolution. It was the week before Easter. Well, we devoted 1.5 days because the first half day in the wind tunnel there was the 75 Familiare, the Family 75, another marvelous car, which unfortunately was never produced. So engineer Furazza was there following the tests, and then I was there because Alfa Romeo rented for 2 days at Pininfarina wind tunnel, and the other day and a half we arrived at the wind tunnel with this model of the 75 Turbo Evoluzione. And I'm gonna show you a picture now. And this car developed in 2 days. There are many elements that are the elements that we will find, well, almost all, on the IMSA cars. Many of these were not realized immediately in the Turbo Evoluzione because there were problems, of course, of production, of type approval, of costs, and so on. So we prepared this model with pieces of polystyrene, wood, cardboard, etc. Then we brought it to the design department of Alfa Romeo, which was still at the Portello. Well, the design department, the Centro Stile, was the last department to leave the Portello, and it was also the last department to leave Arese, apart from the museum. And at the design department, they prepared a model to be presented to those who work in production to build 500 models of the Turbo Evoluzione. And there I met incredible people. I met Antonio Rosti. We are still friends. But at the time, it was his first work, maybe, that he did at the design department at Alfa Romeo. And then I met architect Cresoni, who was, out of all the great designers who I met, the nicest, the one who has the best joie de vivre. In the last years, when he was sent to work in Turin and I was working there as well, well, we met every now and then, and I imagine the architect Cresoni in the atmosphere of Turin in a strange way, but he was happy anyway. And when we met, I said, Cavaccio, hi, do you remember 75 Turbo Evoluzione? It was beautiful. It was the real spirit of Alfa Romeo. It was enthusiastic. And the 75 Turbo Evoluzione actually, well, was not my favorite. I didn't like it so much because in reality, I don't know whether you have a picture of the 75 Turbo, but if you compare it with the IMSA, well, I saw this. I watched the 75 Turbo Evoluzione, comparing it with the other one, but that was it to me. And that this in the end was transformed, well, later on in the 75 Turbo IMSA. So, well, I'm wasting your time. Maybe stop me whenever you want, and let's talk about other things. Well, let's go from the first 75, the Group A, like this one, the racing car that we're seeing, and I thank Massimo Romagnoli, who this morning left at 4 in the morning to bring his car. So this was a Group A car which raced with you, Giorgio. You raced for a few seasons, and then the Giro d'Italia admitted only the Group A, but also the Transam and IMSA. So that gave the possibility, the opportunity of having a more open rule of the competition. What was the difference between the Group A and IMSA? Well, it changed a lot. It changed a lot because, first of all, we worked a lot on the Dedion, which was the part which gave us problems. And if I remember, that is adjustable. So at that time, we could have the camber as we liked. And what changed, of course, is widening the car, because with that fender, it was wide, it was not narrow, and it was easily drivable in that way. And then the turbine, if you open the hood, well, the turbine is very big. The problem of these cars, if we like, well, the problem in a good sense, having such a big turbine, when there was the thrust, it was all there. So either you were very good with the accelerator, taming it, otherwise sometimes when it started, you really had to be a good driver to harness it, but it was a very drivable car. But when it was a full power, it was very fast, and it was not progressive. So, you know, at 3,000 revs, you had the thrust, and you had to know how to tame it. The car was incredible to drive. So we solved all over the years, as Camaschella said, of course. We had focused on all the problems that the Group A75 gave us, and here we solved with amendments, with several tricks. We created a car which was a dream. both on the track and on the streets. So Miki can tell that later on. It was a good balance. I was also able to destroy one, but that's another story. Well, Miki, so you won the Giro d'Italia. How it was? Well, as I said before, the Giro d'Italia was the race that concluded the season. And both times I just received the prize of World Rally Champion. So I was touring the world doing PRs for the group. And I don't remember whether I was in England or in Kenya doing tests for the safari. And Cesare Fiorio called me and told me, you have to do the Giro d'Italia. I said, when is it? And he said, in 5 days. And I said, what? He said, come immediately. And I was puzzled. I said, apart from being tired, I said, how can I try the car? And he said, it's important your presence for us because you're a world champion. And there's Cerrato and Lubedia, the two pilots who are testing the car. So you come, you do your notes. So I didn't have the opportunity to try the track. The car, as I said, yes, I drove it on the Balocco racetrack, but from that to be competitive, it was not easy. Well, I went on the track, we wrote the notes, but we were incredibly lucky. The first 3 days of competition, there was pouring rain and fog. And I had a kind of notes that were very good in those conditions of fog. So having these good specific notes, I could drive even if I didn't know the track very well, so I stayed in front of Cerrato and Lubé. Then Riccardo Patrese, also on the racetrack, did a very good job. And even though we had to be there just for the presence, in the end, we were able to win the race, and it was a great satisfaction because it was a bunch of seconds. But going on a car, challenging like this one, and I mean challenging because it was extremely light and fast, as Giorgio said, the torque had not been invented yet, so it was on, off, and on rain and fog. With my luck and professionalism, I managed to be quicker than my competitors. So it was an incredible satisfaction. And the second year, in '89, we said, okay, let's hope it's going to rain again this year. And then I didn't race with Patrese, I raced with Larini. I don't remember what there was a punctured tire or another problem, so we were behind, and in the end we arrived second place. But that time again it was an incredible performance. So it's a competition that I remember with love because it was one of the most important races in Italy. It was racetrack, mountains, so not all the teams or the pilots were the same. Well, most of them did the entire racetrack by themselves. There were not several pilots, one pilot for the racetrack, one pilot for the street, one pilot for the mountains. So I regret that it was not done again. There were some attempts, maybe in the future they will do it again, but it's always more difficult to race nowadays. But I wanted to underline something about these cars. These cars mirror and the engineers, the teams of those years. An incredible technology was necessary, but technology and research was made by passion. And I mean, these cars were not computer-made cars, but cars made with love, with your heart, with nights spent in the office. And now you put all the data in the computer does everything, and the engineers go to bed. I think that today's cars, don't have the soul that these cars had. So we've seen before a short descriptive chart. The Giro d'Italia was a race that entailed a series of special tests with a pilot, a navigator, and some pilots, in the case of Alfa Romeo, arriving from Formula One. And on the racetrack, well, we have a video with the audio. Well, Giorgio, there were changes between the street races and the racetrack races, apart from the removal of the seat. Well, there were many modifications. The first thing we did when there was a program, we did a development, like doing the racetrack in advance. I mean, well, the first year I wasn't meant to be the official pilot, but Pianta said first we have to test the car in all the circuits, include the special tests. So, how to say, I went to Imola, and we tried the car, and in the evening we went to the hotel in Imola, but there was a special test which went on the other side of the mountains. Now you got the radio and everything. At the time there was nothing. We had, of course, the night headlamps at 11 or midnight. I don't remember very well the time. I had to do the Giro d'Italia as a private on a 75, but I wanted to do the rally part. My problem was that I'm used to drive, and I know the racetrack. Doing the special test with a person on the passenger seat, well, it was disturbing. He spoke, but I didn't listen. So he spoke just for the sake of speaking. Well, to cut it short, we started to go up and down this road, which on average took 40 minutes back and forth. It was a road open to the traffic, but there was no one in the mountains, and the headlamps were very strong, so we would see if someone arrived. At the last leg, I said, okay, let's do one more test, and we'll go to sleep. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. But the last time, always something happens, and I went into the mountain. Well, my navigator had glasses, so I said, let's go off the car, but the problem was that the mechanics had to realize that we were not getting back. So 1 hour passed, but the camion, the truck, could not go up the mountain. So they took the truck, they brought the track on the other side at the final part of the track, and then we dragged the car to the truck. But the problem was that that car had to compete in the competition. So 1 week before the competition, the mechanics took the car to the hangar and they fixed it. But the most important thing is that we changed the setting of the car in terms of dampers and springs, because first we had to have a stiff car on the racetrack because the less oscillation we have, the better it is. But on the racetrack we could have a car bouncing like a camel, so we had to adapt the car to the road. We had everything set, everything was tested. You got there, the mechanics knew what to do, and in half an hour they could change the settings of the car for uphill, and once the uphill was finished, the same, but on the contrary, to go downhill or to do the track. But it was a teamwork. There was a team
diciamo, quando usciva dalla pista, ma c'era già l'altra squadra dall'altra parte, in
working
modo che se no non si riusciva a fare tutto.
in the
E quello era il lavoro
two sides
principale che
of
dobbiamo
the
fare
track,
sempre.
and we
Ma
always
la
had
macchina ha un
to
percorso che andiamo a
uh,
fare.
set the car according to the track we had to race on. And in 1988, well, you won, and then 1989, again, three cars, and we found an interview just before the start. Miki Biasion, last year you won the Giro d'Italia. How are you starting this year the Giro? Well, it's a very interesting competition, and we have a strong competition. It will be hard. I hope to repeat the result of last year. And for you? Well, it will be a long race. It's played on the racetrack, I think, but it's nice to drive those cars on the streets also. And for you, yeah, I find this competition very fun. For also the fact that you have to follow the pilot on the track. It's very fun, I would say. So you were used to supporters of Lancia, but also the Alpha supporters are very strong. Did you feel that, and do you feel it today? The support. Well, let's say that the brands Lancia, Alfa Romeo, uh, uh, are history in the Italian car world. They raced on the street, on the racetrack. They won Formula One. They won rallies. So there was a tradition of sports automobiles, both in Lancia and in Alfa Romeo. And other brands do not have this heritage because they always devoted either to the racetrack or to another area. So the supporters of Alfa Romeo actually are just like the supporters and fans of Lancia and Delta, purists, people who love sports car, Italian engineering, the Italian products, who love technology. I think that, well, it will be more and more difficult from now on, but I think that the real person who has a passion does not only recognize an Alfa Romeo or a Lancia from the uh, sound, but from the smell you have in the air, the way the engine burns the gasoline. So these are characteristics of cars from the past. Now this is disappearing. Now you have to read what's written on a car, or looking at the lines. In the past, they had an incredible personality. I mean, the cars, and we, the Italians, have always been the strongest in the world to design cars. And talk about designing. Well, we talked about the IMSA rules. So, Giorgio Camaschella, if you are still online, so in Italy, usually the IMSA rule was not applied. But I know you were working on that in those years for another car, but at one point you had to adapt the 75, who already existed, and make it a little bit more competitive by using the terms and norms, which gave more possibilities compared to the Italian one. Yes, correct. Then afterwards, I had the chance to do the 333 for Ferrari, but that was a completely different situation because in America, for Ferrari, there were open doors, so they allowed us to do everything. This 75, the IMSA instead, well, in reality, I don't know exactly who had the idea to discover this rule which allowed us to put together a car which would have beaten the competitors who maybe, as Pianta said in the first interview in the beginning, well, no, they wouldn't have the time and money to do a dedicated car specifically to this competition, the Giro d'Italia with the IMSA rule. And I must say that the IMSA rule was a very small leaflet compared to today's rules. It's incredible, but the Americans are like that. So imagine 50 pages of a small book. 46 were advertisement, a pilot, the history of a pilot, the history of and the rule was all in 4 pages. And also the rule of the prototypes of the 333 was on 4 pages. But at the time of Alfa Romeo, at least we didn't have contacts with America, so to have some details specified or explained, because under the aerodynamic part, there are pieces that are called in some way in Milan, in Turin are called in another way, in Maranello are called in another way, in England they have other names, in America, well, we don't know. So, and at the time there was not even Google Translate. So with the dictionary, technical or not so technical dictionary, we tried to look for words, but I don't know how to translate American parts in written in American English into Italian. But the rules were quite open. You could do almost everything. Then maybe with the things that were completely wrong according to the real norm. There was no one seriously able to tell us this is not allowed by the rule. Well, but the car worked. But there should be Nicola Larini now connected, so that's why I'm interrupting you. Good afternoon. Nicola Larini, you won many races for Alfa Romeo, especially the DTM, but today we are talking about the 75 IMSA. What do you remember of those races, the Giro d'Italia, with that car? Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and I apologize for not being present there. Maybe you've told that in the beginning, but I am in Francia Corta for a go-kart race of my son, so I could not be there. I know that Giorgio is there, Miki is there. I miss them. So, talking about your question, I don't remember your question. Can you repeat the question, please? Yes, of course, we wanted a memory of the Giro d'Italia, which was a very specific race for the audience and also for the pilots. Well, the Giro d'Italia, how can I say? After it was cancelled, I was very sad because it was a format which was very peculiar, very loved. There was a great audience, and then there were pilots of rallies, of fast races, and that was unique. So I had the chance of racing side by side with the international level pilots like Miki, Cerrato, for 2 years. So there were not so many opportunities, but in the team there were also pilots from Lancia, Lube, if I'm not wrong, and then I don't remember some names. No, it was 3. We were 3. But there was a rally driver, a rally pilot, who I don't remember now, but it was a specific format. It was clear that on the track the pilot could invent his victory, for example, but if there were problems during the special tests, it was difficult to gain time on the racetrack. It was a bunch of seconds, and maybe in the special tests you could do a mistake and lose a lot of seconds. Maybe totaling the same seconds, you gaining 5 competitions, but it was a great thing and I was enthusiastic about it. But at the time we were not racing with the 75. What do you remember of that car? Well, that was the 75 IMSA. So it was a modified version of the 75 Evoluzione, which already used in Italian Championship and I already used in the Mondiale Turismo. I arrived in 77 in Alfa when the season had already begun during the World Championship, and then I did a few races, and then the Giro d'Italia adventure started. But the cars were not different. So this had more rubber, bigger tires. Maybe Giorgio has more technical details because he was the father of it, but I felt at ease with that or with the other. Well, Giorgio Camaschella said before that apart from you, only Larini was able to go fast from the first leg with this car. Well, Nicola showed that he was fast. He won everything. He won the DTM. Me and Nicola, I would say that we were very in line, in harmony, because he never complained about my work. He was a winning man, and I always had to try to be close to him because he won, and I tried to be next to him or behind him. So I always felt good with him, and of course was a man, a pilot that gave a lot to Alfa Romeo. Correct, Lorenzo? Yes, go along. I wanted to add something. At that time of the Mondiale Turismo, with Giorgio Francia, Larini, and many other pilots, I did some races. There was a generation in the 70s or 80s of Italian pilots who were incredibly strong. But Giorgio Francia on these cars was almost unbeatable. And when in 87, instead of giving the car to privates, we had to race as an official team. Well, incredible Italian pilots were summoned to have a strong team, and they all came to Balocco, Monza to try the track. They went on the car convinced to be faster than Francia, and then after a few laps they stopped, they asked for the timing, but Giorgio Francia was 2 seconds faster, and to reach the timings of Francia they would spend 1 day or 2 days. Larini instead was the first, who I think at the Mugello, when we were simulating the 24 hours of Spa, well, he arrived, and in a few laps he was as fast as Giorgio Francia. So I have this memory of Larini. We've been friends since then. It is true, I also remember that. Thank you, Giorgio. You are so kind. Yes, it is true, I remember that. When I was invited, almost by chance, for the Spa race, the 24-hour Spa, they needed one more pilot. Pianta called me. I recently won the Formula 3 championship in Italy with the Alfa Romeo. Giorgio Pianta called me to do this test at the Mugello. If I'm not wrong, it was night. Yes. I remember that we started at noon, and then after 2 hours everything broke. We had to rebuild the cars at 4 o'clock p.m. and then from 4 p.m. we went on till noon of the next day without breaking anything. Well, I remember that we went to Balocco as well. It was really, well, it was not easy to do the 24 hours without having problems. But I remember that event, and I remember a good position. I was as fast as Giorgio. All the other pilots were lagging behind, so Pianta told me that he would bring me there so to be ready. But you were very young at that time. Yes, I just came from Formula 3. Yeah, it was a young hope of Italian pilots. But I don't know whether people realize that that generation of pilots could have won Grand Prix, World Championship, they would have deserved much more. But unfortunately, you didn't have the right car at the right moment. Well, uh, it was anyway a good experience Alfa Romeo for me because in that moment I was starting to race in the Formula One, so that opportunity, honestly, was important, and I was happy to take it because I also raced in Alfa from that moment, and then I had only an interruption in '97 for 1 year. I raced from '87 to '93 with Alfa without never stopping, basically, except from '97, because Alfa in that moment with ETC and DTM well, was closed. I also refused an offer by Toyota that year to do Le Mans because with Alfa I had a special connection, so I didn't want to leave. And then I knew that there was long-term programs. But we're going off topic.
Quelle occasioni che bisogna sfruttare.
Well, it's one of those occasions we have to grasp.
Io ti ringrazio, so che
Well, I thank you. I know you had just a couple of minutes. We are on the because you are on the racetrack. So thank you for participating. And till next time, hopefully to host you here because our audience wants to listen to all the anecdotes of your wins. I hope so. Unfortunately, I had this other event today, but I couldn't send my son here by himself. He's too young. But have a nice rest of the evening. It was a pleasure seeing you, Nicola.
Miki, invece alcuni noi abbiamo poi raccolto anche
Well, Nikki, we also
un ricordo di
have a memory of Dario Cerrato, who sent us a video that he recorded because he could not be with us today.
aveva fatto commenti molto positivi
And it did very positive comments on the 75, even though he came from the rally cars world. What's the difference? What was the difference compared to the Delta you used in those years, for example, but also the Group B of the previous years?
Io credo che il progetto
Well, I believe that the 75 project, and then with the IMSA even more, it was a project for a car that should race on a racetrack with. So with a certain weight balance, a certain aerodynamics. We know that in rallies the speeds are not so high, so the aerodynamic, especially at the times, impacted relatively, while on the track it was extremely important
per la prestazione.
for the performance.
La cosa interessante
But the
di questo
interesting thing about this car
era la facilità
was
in cui veniva
the fact it was extremely easy,
tutto il lavoro che ha fatto anche Giorgio di sviluppo.
thanks also to Giorgio and the other technicians' developments. So the easiness with which the car was adapted to a certain kind of work. So the racetrack car was low, stiff,
E quindi era impossibile
and it was impossible to drive
asfaltate, ma magari
on tarmacs, but with irregular
un asfalto irregolare.
asphalt.
E invece in poco tempo
While in a short time, the technicians could raise it, increase the height, changing springs and dampers. So I said that I arrived, I jumped on the car, and I started to do the special test. So apart from 2 legs done at Balocco, so the car was less stiff. It was more. There was more oscillation. So it was,
forse
how to say,
in situazione stradale
a car
perché la squadra aveva
for the street because the team also had experience of rallies.
la capacità di
So the capacity of this kind of car to be transformed from circuit car to
da prova speciale era
special test car was
e questo
higher than the rest of the participants, and that's why it was a winning and competitive car since the very beginning. And then I don't remember, maybe Giorgio remembers it, I don't remember whether on the racetrack you had different speed ratios. So, it was more than 100 kilometers per hour with the first shift, well, at 90, okay, you can imagine on the curves in the mountain when it rained. So 400 horses, more or less,
venivano sputati fuori immediatamente
that arrived immediately.
e quindi effettivamente ci voleva un
So
assetto
you needed
valido
a,
perché
an incredible
la potenza
balance to
anche
discharge
eccezionale.
the power, even though the street was not fantastic, but you also needed a car that could be driven in different directions. So the car adapted to this
Nettamente superiore
transformation
che correvano.
way better than all the other racing cars.
Come l'avevate ottenuto
Giorgio,
questo?
how did you obtain this result?
Ma innanzitutto ho
Well,
sentito
first of
dire
all,
solo bene del sottoscritto.
I just heard
Io lavoravo,
compliments
mi divertivo, grazie a Alfa Romeo se facevo
for me, but
il mio mestiere, ma
it was my job.
tanti meriti,
I had fun,
meriti sono.
but the merits are not mine. The merits are all the entire team at the moment.
A quei tempi,
But
oggi come oggi col computer,
we had an advantage at those times.
invece da
So
noi,
now we have the computer.
al momento che la macchina usciva
At the time, there was no computer. The car
era un dialogo
went
tra il sottoscritto
on the racetrack, and then it was just me and the engineers
quindi c'era una
who had an
certa
exchange. So
se vuoi
there was a
fiducia, se
sort
vuoi,
of
perché
a
diceva
feeling
qualcuno,
and
questa cosa non va bene,
faith.
non veniva messo in dubbio, quindi si
If
lavorava.
something said this is not good, it was not questioned.
Io
And then, of course, it is clear that on the track, I could
sulla strada ho cercato
do good things on the street.
trovare la strada giusta,
I
poi
tried to find the right street, but then it was his merit, his credit, Dario's
abbiamo ottimizzato la macchina,
credit, and we
io facevo
optimized the car because I did 90% of the
era
work,
quello di base,
which was the basic one,
10, 20,
and then a 10, 20, 30% was given by those who jumped on the
quello che
car.
veniva da noi era
So
la
those who
macchina,
came
quando io non davo la
here,
delibera la macchina non andava in mano ai piloti.
well, when I gave my approval, the car went to the pilots. So the last step was done by the final pilot. But then clearly, we all had experience. We had Limone, who was coming from the rally universe. So we had a sum of skills and we created a good product.
Oltre ai presenti,
But apart from the people present here, also Dario Cerrato sent us a video that I would like to show you to say hello and to remember the Giro d'Italia, who was won with Giorgio. Hello everyone, I'm Dario Cerrato. In my career, I also had the luck of participating to 2 Giri d'Italia with the mythical Alfa 75 IMSA in 88 and 89. In those years, this car was exceptional. It is still today. It had the rear traction. It was a car which I loved. So much so that in the first edition in 88, together with Larini and Geppi Cerri, my navigator, my second pilot, we arrived second. And then in 89, with Giorgio Francia and always Geppi Cerri, we won. It was an incredible year, also for other satisfactions I had in the rallies, and especially for the Giro d'Italia and then for the rally of Monza, that I won with the same car, the mythical Alfa 75 IMSA. Hello, see you soon.
bene, siamo
Well,
giunti, diciamo,
we are almost at the end of the first part of our conference. There's always a second part made up of questions. If you have questions now, and then we know that there's the third part, which is when lights go off, everyone comes here to ask you directly questions, to ask for autographs, for pictures, and everything else. Well, I thank, of course, the audience who followed us, and I ask you, are there any questions that we can answer immediately?
ho aspettato di aggredire
Or do you want to wait
poi privatamente.
the cameras to be
Come
off?
sempre sarà un'aggressione.
Well, as always, there will be an aggression after the cameras go off. Okay, now there's a question. good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to know the difference between the Super Turismo and the IMSA.
Beh, la differenza
Well,
sostanziale è la
well, the
carreggiata,
main difference
la turbina.
is the width of the tires, the
Poi
turbine,
chiaramente avevamo anche il
and then, of
design
course, we
leggermente
had the
modificato.
Didion, which was slightly modified by the
La
car.
carreggiata allargata chiaramente
Widen,
l'auto,
well, of course,
ma la
it's
cosa
another
fondamentale è
car,
la
but the fundamental
carreggiata.
thing is that
Le Didion
widen
sono
tires, the
modificate per la
Dion
turbina,
modified and the turbine, which is
avevamo più di
fundamental. We had more than 400
450
horses. On the
Tra l'altro
350,
non mi ricordo
I
se
don't
era
remember, it was
360, però sì,
360,
avevamo almeno
but here we had at
50-60
least
cavalli
50,
in più.
60 horses more. Thank you.
Certo, prego.
Good afternoon. So the torsion bars in the front are no longer there. I guess it's now telescopic
Dovremmo avere le molle da prossimo.
springs. If I'm not wrong, there are springs, but I'm not sure.
Per andare alle molle.
Yeah, it should have the springs.
Arrivo.
Good afternoon. I would like to ask to Miki Biasion, since you have competed with Lancia and Alfa Romeo, in which of the two did you feel the strongest emotions? Thank you.
Sicuramente l'esperienza,
Well, the experience with the Alfa Romeo, of course, was super interesting.
come ripetevo prima,
And as I
peccato
said
che
before,
il Giro d'Italia non
it's a
sia
shame that the Giro d'Italia
logicamente guidare una vettura come
was no
questa,
longer repeated, but driving such a car,
per andare forte con
well,
una macchina
to-
come questa bisogna
to race fast with such a car, you have to do a very fine trajectory. You need a very different kind of driving compared to the rallying. Even though we did a special tests in the rally style, but with this kind of car,
era diverso.
it was different.
Io sono nato rallista, mi piace
I was born as a rally driver. I like to skid. I like, to do skidding and different kinds of driving. I had to change my mindset when I did the Giro d'Italia with this car. And also in the following years, after 10 years, I did with Maserati, a Porsche Ferrari Challenge, racetrack races, and even there I had fun and I drove quite well.
come pilota sono nato
But as a pilot, I was born counter steer and skid, so doing that with the IMSA was counterproductive because you went against the chronometer. But I remember that some of the people in the audience of the time sometimes they send me messages say, okay, you are still skidding with the 75.
è stato un periodo bello.
So it was a nice period. It was nice to race with that car.
Questo ovviamente è per voi.
Of course, this is for you.
Grazie ancora
Well, thank you
al pubblico che è sempre
to our audience, which is always the main protagonist of these backstages. Thank you, Miki, for finding the time to come here. It was an honor for us having you here. It's not nostalgia, it's passion.
Grazie a voi.
Thank you.
Grazie, grazie.
Grazie anche a te Giorgio.
So thank you, Giorgio.
Ringrazio Giorgio Camaschella che
I thank Giorgio Camaschella, who I hope is still connected, Nicola Larini,
nonostante
who connected even though he was busy, Dario Cerrato,
del suo
who
tempo,
gave us part of his time, so it was a good experience for everyone. Thanks again, and see you next time for next backstage. Thank you.